Hello everyone, Santir here with my Guild Wars 1 skill review project, where I'm covering the Assassin this time. And this video specifically will be about Dagger Mastery. Now, Dagger Mastery is going to be skills that are predominantly focused on wielding daggers. That's what you'd expect. Excuse me, so a lot of these skills are going to be lead attacks, offhand attacks, dual attacks. These all are subcategories of dagger attacks. They could all collectively be called dagger attacks, but they have specific properties. I discussed them in the intro video, but basically, just to give a quick recap, a lead attack will will basically leave a lead attack mark on an enemy. An offhand attack will leave an offhand mark on an enemy, and a dual attack will leave a dual attack mark on an enemy. And then certain skills can require those marks to be used. So, for example, traditionally, offhand attacks require a lead attack, so they'll have the line must follow a lead attack, and dual attacks will traditionally require an offhand attack, so it says must follow an offhand attack. The traditional chain then being lead to offhand to dual attack. All of this has a lot of complexity, I guess you could say, in terms of crafting a bar, because you only want so many lead attacks, so many offhand attacks, so many dual attacks. In one given bar, you tend to build some sort of attack chain that you're using. Maybe you have some variants at some spots with some useful but longer cooldown skills or things like that. So perhaps, for example, you will bring a Death Blossom and critical strikes and use critical strikes when you need the energy from it and things like that. But in general, you have that base idea of a chain, but then you also will have some skills that sort of are a type of skill but don't have the standard requirement. So, for example, Black Spider Strike is an offhand attack, but it must strike a hexed foe, not must follow a lead attack. So there is some variant that way. Also, there are a few naming conventions. So, for example, the black prefix, so when it says Black Mantis Thrust, Black Spider Strike, that prefix means this cares about the enemy being hexed. Specifically, it's looking for hexed enemies. You'll see the falling prefix on these skills right here. Falling means that it requires the foe to be knocked down, so it specifically targets a knocked down foe. Spider, I guess, like Black Spider Strike, Falling Spider, means that it inflicts poison. The skill inflicts poison. Fox is usually referring to unblockability, so Fox Fangs, Golden Fox Strike, these can both be unblockable attacks. Golden means you are enchanted, so for example, Golden Fox Strike, the fox part means unblockable, but that's conditional on being enchanted. So golden means you are enchanted. And then Lotus is typically used to refer to gaining energy. So, for example, we have just straight up, I believe, Lotus Strike right here, just straight Lotus Strike, it gains you energy. And then there's Ox. So Horns of the Ox and Trampling Ox, these skills specifically knock down foes. Not all of these skills follow these conventions, and there's a lot of skills that kind of don't, but you're going to see some of this stuff showing up. So there is some sort of convention going on here, just for you to be aware of that exists. I don't know if there's any specific meaning to like a strike versus stab or things like that. I think that's just kind of flavor. But so that's just kind of some of the convention that you see in here. I just wanted to mention that because I think it's a little bit of an interesting game design thing of like, okay, we're going to take specific effects that we're going to have on a lot of these skills and we're going to name them something. And so that's a way of building up skill names, is saying, okay, well, what if we take this property and we say it gets this part? So black being foe hexed, golden being me enchanted, right? And so you can kind of start to build up this vocabulary that you can make skill names from, where the names then convey information to people. Like Mantis, I think, for example, has to deal with crippled. Like Black Mantis Thrust inflicts crippled, and I believe there's Leaping Mantis Sting also inflicts crippled. So, like, you can build up some of this vocabulary, even if it's just for a couple skills, and then you can bring some consistency to skill names. You can make it so that way it's easier for you to name skills and allows people to know what they mean, what the skill does a little bit generally, kind of like offhand and stuff like that. It's a useful thing to think about and consider, especially when you have to name a bunch of skills in a game, to have some scheme that you're building up, and I think it's an interesting thing to see that in this. So anyway, let's go ahead and start rating skills, jumping in here with Black Mantis Thrust. which is 5 energy, 1 second activation time, 6 second recharge. It is a lead attack. If this attack hits, you strike for plus 18 damage, and if the foe you attack is suffering from Hex, they become crippled for 13 seconds. So this, it should be noted, quick activation times are actually quite useful. 1 second is faster than normal attack rate. So that is a very useful property of this. The recharge is kind of in what I would kind of consider the medium area. I'm usually wanting the 4 second or lower recharges, but 6 seconds is with an acceptable bounds. Inflicting crippled on hexed foes can be quite useful. Certainly, it makes it easier to stay on top of an enemy that is moving at half speed, and so that is quite nice. But it's also not so important that it's the main thrust. It does have some synergies, specifically Jungle Strike right here, I believe. Yeah, has an effect if you hit a crippled foe with it. But for the most part, and actually Trampling Ox also, if you hit a crippled foe, has an effect. I don't know why they didn't codify that, but here we are. But yeah, so the crippled can be useful. That's something that can come in handy. This is one of those skills that I'm like, this is okay. This is a fine lead attack. I don't tend to choose it very often, just because my lead attack of choice is Golden Fox Strike. It deals good plus damage, has one of the shorter recharges, and can be unblockable, which is really nice. So that tends to be the lead attack that I use the most. So you're usually going to see that on my bar. It looks kind of like lasers shooting at a guy, but I think that's glowing daggers. But anyway, most lead attacks for me are competing against this skill. That's just how it works. You only want so many lead attacks on a bar. And sometimes I will pick Black Mantis Thrust, but for the most part, this is a 3. It's fine. I don't have anything against it. Occasionally I will consider it, but I just don't get drawn to it very often. It is slightly longer recharge. The faster activation is nice, but the slightly longer recharge is a downside. So unless I'm getting, and it deals less damage as well. Like this is 26 damage. This is 18. So unless I'm really, in fact, getting off this cripple and getting benefit from it, I don't tend to choose this one very often. So I like the design space it's playing around in. Like, this is a great thing to open up with of, hey, I'm going to cripple you so that way you cannot run away from me. Like, that's all quite fantastic. So it's a reasonable space. It's just most of the time I'm wanting to get to my dual attack as often as possible, like just in standard use case. And for that, the quicker recharge of Golden Fox Strike is what matters. So Black Spider Strike. So that's our next one. This is 10 energy, 12 second recharge, offhand attack. Must strike a hexed foe. It does not require an offhand or a lead attack, so this can jump straight to an offhand attack. If it hits, this attack strikes for plus 17 damage, and the target foe is poisoned for 17 seconds. Which the poison is certainly some nice additional damage, or can be useful for applying some of that additional condition pressure, or using other things that care about conditions. You can get some nice degen going with the Sharpened Daggers enchantment to make your daggers inflict bleeding. This one is, I'm not usually going to bring this one. To me, this is, I guess I'm going to give this a 2. It is slightly more likely to be used in some regards. Well, that's not really true. Then I was going to say compared to Black Mantis Thrust. The thing is, this skill is very useful in longer chains where you are trying to jump into dual attacks quickly and stuff like that. But you do need to build around the hex. Obviously, this does nothing if a foe's not hexed. If a foe's not hexed, this skill fails and does nothing. It just wastes your energy. It is kind of expensive in that regard as well. But being able to jump straight to another dual attack is really powerful. So this can be a really nice open if you are doing a bunch of hexing in your party. So if you have some sort of hex that you are able to be throwing around or whatever, this can be a nice way of jumping straight to, okay, offhand attack, dual attack. Maybe that dual attack, you have some way of going back to some other things. Mobius Strike right down here fits really nicely into that, where you're like, because this Mobius Strike is probably going to come up a lot because this is an offhand attack that must follow a dual attack. So you can go from a dual attack to this to another offhand. So going something like Black Spider Strike into a dual attack, into Mobius Strike, into another dual attack, and then kind of looping stuff that way can be really strong. But you do have to have a lot of considerations of building around hexing foes and things like that. There are various reasons why you might want to use some specific assassin hexes as well. Assassins have some useful hexes, so it's not like this is completely unreasonable to use, but you are kind of doing some specific things to use it. You're probably going into deadly arts if you're doing that. So I think this is a reasonable sort of role player skill, but it is more of a build around me than a lot of the other sort of like simple chains. This is part of something that's going to lead to a more complex chain or a more elaborate chain, and that can be a lot of fun to play. I'm not going to tend to do that on heroes, but that can be a lot of fun to play, and that can do a lot of very powerful single target damage because you're unleashing a lot of skills. But there's a lot more trickiness to setting that up and making sure you've set up a chain that executes well and stuff like that. Okay, so that brings us to Blades of Steel. So this is, and if I didn't make it clear, I like the design space that this is playing around in. I like alternate conditions for offhands. Anyway, Blades of Steel is 5 energy, 8-second recharge, dual attack, must follow an offhand attack. If it hits, this attack strikes for plus 14 damage, maximum of 60 for each recharging dagger attack. So this is really nice as the finisher of a longer dagger attack chain. If you can get 5 skills going, or potentially another 4 skills. I think it counts itself. I think it might count itself. But if you can get enough other skills going, where you have like this is a cap for like a 4 or 5 skill chain, this can deal a lot of additional damage. The thing is, like, that's all it kind of does. Like, this is a 3 for me. It's fine. It's a fine capper. I don't mind running it. It can do a lot of additional damage, even with a traditional chain, provided it does count itself, as I believe it does. Certainly, it can deal, was that 28, 42? You can get the damage pretty reasonably up there. You do want to be trying to push that 60, but honestly, Death Blossom is so impossible to beat. And we'll get to Death Blossom next, because it's obviously the next in this alphabetical list. So Blades of Steel is like, this is a fine skill. You do kind of want to build a little bit of a longer chain for it, and you kind of want those skills to have a long enough recharge that by the time you get to Blades of Steel, they're still recharging, so they count. So it's maybe a little bit more awkward, but I feel like the power is enough there that I'm pushing it up to a 3. It's kind of a borderline 2-3 sort of skill. So I don't know. Is 3 too high? I'm kind of talking myself down from a 3 to a 2, because I feel like you really do need to be setting up some specific things to really maximize this. I'm going to give this a 2, actually. After discussing it some, because I do feel like, as I've been processing it, like, I like the design spaces it's playing around in. Again, like, it's encouraging slightly longer recharging dagger attacks. It's encouraging longer chains, which is something that you want people to experiment with. I think a lot of that is really good. It's just, it is a bit finicky to try to maximize damage from. So, that's kind of where we're at with it. So it can hit really, really, really hard, and is a really good finisher to a long chain, and encourages that. That's all really good, but for just a standard bar, that's a little bit much, and so it's just, again, it also competes really poorly against Death Blossom. So let's talk about Death Blossom, because that's next. This is the dual attack. The only other dual attack that, like, so I will often bring this with critical strikes. It's very rare that I will make some sort of assassin build that does not run Death Blossom. So let's go ahead and read it. It is 5 energy. It has a 2-second recharge, which is very low. 2 seconds is like, by the time you get back up to this skill, it will have recharged, is really what it comes down to. So this is a dual attack. It must follow an offhand attack. And if it hits, Death Blossom strikes your target for plus 40 damage, and all adjacent foes take 40 damage. So this does area of effect. This is going to be 80 damage in area of effect, keep in mind. And again, very quick recharge. You can pull this back up, like, it refreshes very quickly, so you can get back up to this quite often. This is my go-to dual hand attack, because the damage is really good. The recharge is ludicrously low, so you can get to it so quickly, so rapidly and whatnot. The area of effect is so important. Just the raw plus damage on this is really high. Honestly, I think the skill is too good. I think it does a bit too much. If you look at a lot of the dual attacks, like Blades of Steel requires you to jump through hoops in order to get the same damage as Death Blossom on a longer recharge. Horns of the Ox is additional stuff. It has very low plus damage. Ninetale Strike doesn't even hit that amount of plus damage. The same amount of plus damage. There's not actually a ton of dual attacks. Twisting Fangs compares okay against Death Blossom for single target damage just because Deep Wound is that powerful. But, like, Death Blossom has it all. It has high single target damage. It does area of effect damage. It has a low recharge. It has only 5 energy cost. This is a 5. This is so ridiculously powerful. So much so that I think it pushes skills that you might otherwise bring off of the assassin skill bar. It decreases choice by being so good, so just generally good at everything you want to do, with no compromise. Like I said, high damage, area of effect, low recharge, only 5 energy. This skill needs to be 10 energy or have like a 12-second recharge, or maybe like... So if I were to try to fix this skill, I'd probably bump the recharge up to 4 seconds, see how that feels, and then I'd take the direct target damage down by like 75%. I would try it at like, strike target foe for like plus 10 damage, and all adjacent foes take 40, something like that, or even like no damage to your direct target. That might actually be better, funnily enough, because it allows you to be able to chain on that one target with like Mobius Strike, which also has a 2-second recharge. Allows you to be able to chain on that single target longer and kind of pump area of effect more. Death Blossom is just... It's one of those things where design-wise, it's a little too good and a little too easy to use, and just realistically, it just probably needs to be like 10 energy on like a 6-second recharge or something like that to kind of put it in a balanced spot. And in fact, I think if you go into PvP, they have done quite a bit to nerf it into a more reasonable space. But the thing is, PvP, this skill is automatically less good anyway because the area of effect is less important. PvE area of effect matters a lot. PvP, players are a lot better at spreading out and not getting all ganged up on. Like, area of effect stuff just is less valuable in PvP. And so Death Blossom loses part of its strength. And then on top of that, you're probably wanting to try to build those longer chains that can actually take somebody out from full, or have a reasonable chance of doing so. So Death Blossom just, it can be a part of that, particularly if the single target thing is there, but it's just not as singularly powerful in that mode, where stacking up conditions and like Twisting Fangs is way better in PvP. Those longer chains, Black Spider Strike is better in PvP because you want to be building those chains of like, I am loading you down with a ton of conditions, I'm dealing like 400 damage to you, plus Deep Wound, and inflicting a ton of conditions. That way you kind of like, I can auto-attack you like 2 times after I've unloaded my chain and you're dead, sort of thing. Whereas that's just not as valuable in PvE, so it's much more useful to be able to get a lot of the area of effect. So just from a design standpoint, I think Death Blossom is a little bit of a crutch for Assassins and just too good from a design standpoint, but you kind of almost need it because the Assassin profession is such a single target thing, and that's just not as valuable in PvE, that you kind of need an overpowered Death Blossom to make Assassin really powerful in PvE, to the point where it can kind of compete with like Dervish and things like that, where it has a reasonable chance of actually seeing use. So it's just kind of where it's at, unfortunately. Desperate Strike. So Desperate Strike is 5 energy, 6-second recharge, lead attack. If you have less than 74% health, you deal plus 51 damage. Of course, the less than percentage for health goes down the less dagger mastery you have, and goes up the more you have, as the same sort of thing with plus damage. This is an interesting space to play around in. I wish it had some, so this deals a lot of damage. Okay, so this is really, really hard to use well in PvE. Obviously, you don't want to be in the condition where you have low health, So I would rather see this have like a 1-2 second recharge or something, because a lot of the time getting that, frankly, quite large amount of plus damage is actually kind of tricky to do in PvE, because your heroes and everything are going to be trying to keep you healthy. I kind of wish that this had more of a benefit than just like I deal lots of damage to try to take this person down more quickly. Like if it did something to try to compensate for the fact that your health is low. I don't know. Like, I sort of appreciate the design spaces it's trying to play around in, but just it's one of those design spaces that's really awkward to be able to do reliably. So like this is the sort of skill that I could see bringing as like a 14th or 16th skill or something like that, but just doesn't have quite enough going for it to me. I'm going to give this a 2. It's very awkward to use effectively, I think, especially in this sort of game, and especially if you're playing with a bunch of AI, even if you're playing with humans. Like, you have to specifically communicate to them, hey, you know, and it plays well in that sort of, like, we're using Word of Healing, and we're waiting, or Zealous Benediction, we're waiting to get to 50% health to really start kicking in our heals in earnest and stuff like that. Like, if you are able to kind of maintain that playstyle, Desperate Strike starts to look a bit more attractive, because if you're getting down lower in the health, where you're getting below that 3/4 mark, you definitely want to know where that is in terms of the amount of HP you have to be able to use this reliably. But I'm not usually bringing this, because it's just a lot of the time this reads 5 energy, 6 second recharge, lead attack. And unfortunately that, I mean, quite bluntly, that's just not good enough. There are a lot of other options that are basically just read lead attack and do more than this. Jagged Strike is a really good example. This has a quick activation and a shorter recharge, and basically just says lead attack. So Desperate Strike is not preferable to me over Jagged Strike in that regard, because of its longer recharge, and it's unlikely that I'm going to get that plus damage. I kind of wish it was like you steal that much health, right? If you have less than 74% health, you steal 51 health from your target. That would be a lot more interesting to me. That would feel like it's playing into the space in a bit more of an interesting way. But I mean, here it is. It's an okay area to play around in. I just think it's really hard to actually use it effectively. And so while the plus damage from this is huge, I would much, much, much rather use Unsuspecting Strike, which hits even harder, has a lower recharge, and is reliant on where my enemy is, not where I'm at. And I don't even like Unsuspecting Strike that often just because of its energy cost. But anyway, that's probably enough on this one. Disrupting Stab, 5 energy, 10 second recharge, lead attack. If this attack hits, it interrupts target foe's action. If that action was a spell, it is disabled for 9 seconds. This is a fine skill. It's not really... Here's the thing. It's not really part of a standard combo. It can lead into a combo, certainly. But if I were to be bringing this, I would not be bringing it as the skill that I'm using to start off my combo chain. Recharge is a little bit long in that regard, and it doesn't deal any plus damage, which I don't quite like. This is a fine way of like, oh, the enemy is leading with this thing, I'm going to interrupt it. But here's the other thing. You'll notice that this has no activation time. This is an interrupt that happens at normal attack speed, and that's also really disfavorable to me. I want my interrupts to be something where I can kind of more reliably get them off, and I feel like Disrupting Stab is just going to be a little hard to actually use in a kind of a reliable, consistent way. It's kind of an homage to the Axe Disrupting Chop skill, and it similarly troubled as that one. The lead attack is technically useful. I like the idea of where this is playing around in. It's just like not a skill that I'm going to just slot onto a bar a lot of the time, because I don't feel like this is a key player in sort of your spike the target down type of build, the sort of build that's like let's chain as much damage as quickly together as we can. It doesn't really fit into that. So I'm going to give this guy a 3, which might seem a little high compared to how I was talking about it, but it's like this is fine. It's useful utility. There are some other options for interrupts in Assassin and Deadly Arts that you don't really need any attributes for to make okay use of. So I'm just not thrilled by it, but I'm not like... I feel like it does something useful. I feel like that functionality can be made use of much more so than Desperate Strike. So I feel like this is like one of those skills that I look at. I'm like, this is okay. It's not really what I'm trying to do, but yeah. Exhausting Assault. So this is a very strange one. So it's 5 energy, half-second activation time, 8-second recharge, dual attack, must follow a lead attack, which is very peculiar. Your dual attacks do not typically follow lead attacks. Target foe's action is interrupted. If that action was casting a spell, that foe suffers 10 overcast. So, this is very strange in a couple of regards. So first of all, it's a little hard to use because it does have to follow a lead attack. You can't just use it when they're using a skill, right? You have to follow a lead attack. So you kind of almost want to like be working this with something where you're placing lead attacks on your target a lot, and then suddenly, boom, you pop this on them once they start using a skill. This does no plus damage whatsoever. Has a fairly short recharge, but like there's no plus damage on it, so it's kind of like you could do like lead attack into this, but I mean that's unexciting to me. Also, it's unlikely to catch 2 spells. Generally, like this is going to hit boom boom, like it's very, very quick in terms of getting both those hits off. So you're often only going to interrupt like 1 spell because they're not going to have time to really start a sync at 1 after the first one's interrupted, although they might. Inflicting Overcast is an interesting negative side effect. I actually like Inflicting Overcast as a nice alternative to disabling skills. I kind of wish that space was played around in a bit more. Like I wish Mesmer, in one of its interrupts, was like interrupt target spell, and if a spell is interrupted this way, they suffer, overcast that maybe scales with your whatever domination magic, whatever that would be. Like I think that space is interesting to play around in. Technically, this could be no attribute. This doesn't actually require any Dagger Mastery as well. You'll notice there's no green numbers here. This doesn't scale with anything. Technically, the dagger damage scales with Dagger Mastery, but this is all around kind of an oddball. To me, this feels like I don't know. Like, I think you can just bring this. I think there are some specific circumstances where you can kind of build around it a little bit. I don't know. I'm torn between giving this a 2 and a 3, because I feel like to really make use of this, you kind of are playing in some weird spaces. Maybe there's a hex that we'll see much later when we get to know attribute. That I guess I might as well bring up now just to mention it. Mark of Instability right here. It says the next time you hit target foe with a dual attack skill, that foe is knocked down. So you could do like this into like Black Mantis thrusts, and then Exhausting Assault to get like a quick knockdown off or something. That seems a little weird. I don't know. I'm going to give this a 2 just because I feel like this is a little bit weird and awkward to try to make good use of. I don't think it's a bad skill per se, but it's a quirky one. But I do like the design space it's playing around in if the action you interrupted was a spell, it inflicts Overcast. And to me, that's a really interesting punishment for spellcasting that I really wish Arena had played around with more. It was Exhaustion originally, but whatever. But yeah, so I don't know. I like where, and that's why this is called Exhausting Assault, by the way, I assume, is because if the foe is casting a spell, they suffer exhaustion. Exhausting Assault, but the name got desynced as things changed. But yeah, I like the design space playing around. It's just a very quirky skill. So, okay, Falling Lotus Strike. So Falling Lotus Strike is 5 energy, 12-second recharge, offhand attack. Must strike a knocked down foe. If it hits, you strike for plus 31 damage, and you gain 10 energy. So, there's 2 falling skills here. The other one is Falling Spider. They deal actually the same plus damage, just one gains you energy, the other poisons the foe. Falling Spider has a lower recharge. That said, so to me, both of these are kind of like the same sort of category. You put them in a build that inflicts knockdown on an enemy either probably like halfway through your combo. So you're probably doing something where you're opening up with, say, Palm Strike, Trampling Ox, Falling Spider or Lotus, Twisting Fangs, something like that, where like somewhere, or like you have somewhere in the middle of your combo you're inflicting a knockdown. Maybe it's through shock, maybe it's through Dwarven Headbutt, whatever. There's some options for inflicting knockdown. But partway through your combo, you're inflicting knockdown and following up with one of these moves. Or potentially you're opening with them with Wastrel's Collapse, which is a no attribute skill that can inflict knockdown. Shadow steps you to a foe and inflicts knockdown if they're not using a skill. I guess I might as well show it to you. We'll talk about Wastrel's Collapse much later as well, but this is a useful shadow step that inflicts knockdown. And then you can lead it with one of these. In terms of that sort of build, I need to find my spot here. I actually kind of like Falling Lotus Strike mildly better. While the shorter recharge of Falling Spider is nice, if it's occurring in the middle of your combo, Falling Lotus Strike having energy gain can be really useful for continuing and finishing your combo, because often that's going to be very energy intensive to kind of go through all of those skills. So you're kind of shooting through a bunch of your energy, so having a refill in the middle of your combo is more valuable than inflicting poison and having a slightly shorter recharge a lot of the time. That said, this is a 2. You are having to build around it. You're not just casually like throwing this on and be like, oh, the enemies are going to be getting knocked down. Sure, this is going to work. You have to intentionally be trying to knock them down, and you, as the assassin using this skill, you probably want to be in control of that. You probably want to be bringing a knockdown, just because trying to do it off an ally inflicting knockdown from some sort of skill typically is really hard to take good advantage of, because you have to be kind of in the right place at the right time and all that sort of stuff. So you do have to do a lot to build around it. Falling Spider is going to be very similar in that regard, so this is also going to be a 2, just because you do really have to build around them. I like Falling Lotus a little bit more if your knockdown is going to be more often in the middle of your combo, and Falling Spider a bit more if it's going to be early in your combo. So Falling Spider is 5 energy, 8-second recharge, so it's 4-second faster recharge than Falling Lotus Strike. Offhand attack, must strike a knocked down foe. If it hits, Falling Spider strikes for plus 31 damage, and your targeted foe is poisoned for 17 seconds. So this is better at the start of a combo because poison will have more time to work and deal damage, which adds additional damage to this, and you probably, like, the 8-second recharge is nice, and you don't need the energy refill from Falling Lotus Strike as much. That said, like, these skills are semi-interchangeable to me, so Falling Lotus often I like better in the middle of a combo because of the energy regain. Falling Spider can be nice at the start of a combo because of the poison having time to work. I like the space that these are playing in, though. They're really great ways of saying, well, we can allow you to extend your combo, but you have to jump through some hoops to do so. But those sorts of skills are really nice to have, because having ways of being able to skip the lead attack phase and directly into offhand to dual attack tends to be more powerful. And so these are some interesting ways of doing that, and I like the space that they're playing around in. I like that ArenaNet provided some options for, okay, well, if you want to skip straight to offhand, here's some ways that you can do it. And I appreciated that they did that. So, Flashing Blades. So Flashing Blades is 10 energy, 30-second recharge, elite stance. For 25 seconds, you have a 75% chance to block incoming attacks while attacking. That's really important. While attacking. If you are chasing an enemy, if you are running, this does nothing. If you block an attack in this way, your attacker takes 17 damage. So if this includes like arrows, if they're shooting you or throwing bows at you or wanding you, whatever, they'll take damage. If they're melee attacking you, they'll take damage. The Ampha love this skill, the Ampha assassins, that can be really annoying. This is a relatively powerful blocking stance. It's not a skill I tend to use a whole lot, just because I'm typically doing something slightly different with my elite slot. Most likely I'm using an elite shadow step, just because elite shadow steps tend to have shorter recharges than non-elite ones. So something like Wastrel's Collapse or Beguiling Haze? We'll see it later when we get to Shadow Arts. There's some options there that I tend to go to for my elite more often, because having a shadow step is really useful for battlefield mobility. But Flashing Blades is a nice way of adding some tankiness that also deals damage. It's kind of like a variant on Gladiator's Defense, the Warrior Tactics skill, but with some different restrictions. So Gladiator's Defense had a shorter relative duration, but Flashing Blades requires you to be attacking. Now, note that you don't have to technically be wielding daggers, but it is in Dagger Mastery, so to get good duration from it, you have to be speccing in Dagger Mastery. At that point, you might as well be using daggers. But technically, you could spec heavily into Dagger Mastery and Swordsmanship for some reason and use this with a sword or whatever. I don't know why you would, because that sounds super awkward. To me, this is a 3. This is like a perfectly fine skill that I'm like fine with running, but just generally speaking, there's something else that I'm doing with my elite slots. So, that's kind of where it's at. It's a reasonable space to be in. I like that it has that counterplay of it doesn't work while you're running, and that to me is kind of an interesting space to be in. Okay, Fox Fangs. So Fox Fangs is almost kind of the standard offhand attack, actually. I think like when you first switch to Assassin, you get this as one of the free skills you unlock. But anyway, it's 5 energy, half-second activation time, which is a quick activation, which is really nice. It compresses your combo speed when you're able to have the quick activation skills like this, where you can be like, lead attack, boom, into this, like right away into your dual attack. That's really nice. It also only has a 3-second recharge, which is quite short. There is some awkwardness in that a lot of the dual attack that you're wanting to go into, that is Death Blossom, has a 2-second recharge, so this doesn't quite match up with that. It's a little bit longer. That's a little awkward, but anyway, Fox Fangs is an offhand attack. It must follow a lead attack, and Fox Fangs cannot be blocked. That's the Fox part of the Fox Fangs, and it strikes for plus 30 damage if it hits. So it has a pretty solid amount of additional damage. Being unblockable is really nice. So here's the thing. My standard offhand attack is actually Wild Strike. So it has a 4-second recharge just like Golden Fox Strike does. It has, I mean, the same damage here, right? 30 damage, 30 damage. This also cannot be blocked. It's an offhand that must follow lead attack. So while its stats are a little bit worse than Fox Fangs, half-second activation and 3-second recharge are clearly superior to standard attack speed and 4-second recharge. Wild Strike also ends stances. So that actually tends to be very useful utility. So Fox Fangs, I think, is like, it's one of those skills that's like, this is fine, but it's very similar to Wild Strike, and Wild Strike's additional utility combined with the fact that it's not really advantageous to recharge faster than the only lead attack you're bringing means that I just don't tend to use Fox Fangs. To me, it's like, it's a 3. It's perfectly serviceable. It's a perfectly fine skill. It's just, you only want so many offhand attacks, and Fox Fangs just doesn't quite fit in there very well. Just because I usually am bringing 1 lead attack, 1 offhand attack, and then maybe Death Blossom plus critical strikes for energy management. So, and I don't tend to use critical strikes as much. So, like I said, this is my standard opening of Golden Fox Strike, Wild Strike, Death Blossom, and Fox Fangs just isn't quite able to usurp Wild Strike in that sort of combo. There is some argument, because Jagged Strike is another option that also has quick activation, so you could do Jagged Strike into Fox Fangs, but Fox Fangs has a 3-second recharge, which is super awkward. I'd be more interested in that combo leading up into Death Blossom if Fox Fangs was also a 1 or 2-second recharge. But anyway, that's just kind of where things are. I think this is a fine, straightforward design for an offhand skill, even a solid one, but in terms of how much I use them, it doesn't quite end up what I'm using. So Fox's Promise. This is 10 energy, 1-second cast time, 20-second recharge, elite enchantment spell. For 17 seconds, your dagger attacks cannot be blocked. This enchantment ends the next time you fail to hit. So there are, of course, many reasons why you could fail to hit. Generally, it's going to be because you miss, either because you're blind or blurred vision or something like that. In terms of ways of giving yourself unblockability, this is nigh 100% uptime, and is quite effective at doing that. There are some other options that are non-elites that you can use, but I mean, you're probably in Dagger Mastery. already on an assassin, so this then, and it only works with daggers, obviously, becomes a reasonable option. But here's the problem. This is unblockable if you're enchanted. This is just straight up unblockable for some random reason. So most of the time when I'm going to want to be getting rid of getting blocked, it's going to be whirling defense on some random ranger in Corna or whatever, or Drider's defenses or whatever. It's basically some random ranger using a blocking stance most of the time when I'm getting frustrated with things blocking me. That's gotten rid of by Wild Strike. So Golden Fox Strike, again, can be unblockable, so that gets the lead attack tick, or whatever you want to call that, mark on the foe that I need to activate Wild Strike to get rid of their stance, and then my Death Blossom can land happily. So Fox's Promise is one of those skills that's kind of a solution looking for a problem. Like, this is a very powerful way of answering blocking. It's just a lot of enemies are not powerfully blocking in a way that I need to be able to address them. So this is a good counterplay option, but there are other choices that are not elite and whatnot. So I'm going to give this a 2. Very powerful counter option, but it just doesn't quite have a reason for me to use it, is really what it comes down to. Because, again, I have other ways of dealing with blocking. I can be bringing these two guys with, say, Shattering Assault. Like, if it's an area where there's lots of enchantments blocking me, maybe going with Shattering Assault over, or in addition to, perhaps, Death Blossom, makes a lot of sense, because I can unblockably get there. There's enough ways that I can enchant myself as an assassin to make Golden Fox Strike reliably unblockable, into Wild Strike to get rid of any stances that are blocking me, into Shattering Assault that get rid of any enchantments that are blocking me, and that whole chain is unblockable. So, Fox's Promise would be more interesting if fewer assassin skills had native inbuilt unblockability to them, in terms of, like, the ones that I tend to use a lot. So that's just kind of the awkward place of where it sits. Golden Fang Strike. So this is 5 energy, 4-second recharge, offhand attack, must follow lead attack. If you are under the effects of an enchantment and this attack hits, then your target foe suffers from a deep wound for 17 seconds. This is another one of those, like, this is perfectly fine. Obviously, this is useless if you are not enchanted, but that's an easy enough bar to meet that I'm not going to count that, like, against it, if that makes sense. Its recharge is good. The effective deep wound is actually quite a lot of additional damage. It's invisible to the skill, obviously, because the skill itself doesn't deal any plus damage. But I feel like this is one of those skills that's like, this is fine, but I have other ways of inflicting deep wound. I have, like, across my my characters, right? And typically the utility of removing a stance and being unblockable with Wild Strike is just a more useful offhand. So this to me is like a 3. It's fine. It's totally fine. I wish there was some consistent meaning with Fang, but that doesn't matter much. It's just, like, when am I going to pick this over Wild Strike? Well, basically never, and that's the skill's main problem. That brings us to Golden Fox Strike, which I've talked about a lot. This is 5 energy, 4-second recharge, lead attack. If this attack hits, target foe takes plus 26 damage. If you are under the effects of an enchantment, this attack cannot be blocked. So I've basically already exhaustively talked about this one. This is just really useful. It's one of the fastest recharging lead attacks that does plus damage. There are other options that recharge faster. There's Jagged Strike as a lead attack that recharges faster, but it inflicts bleeding, not additional plus damage. And Unsuspecting Strike recharges faster at only 2 seconds, but it costs 10 energy, which is a huge downside. It does deal more damage, but the larger energy cost is a huge downside. And outside of that, there's not really any other lead attacks that have, like, most of them are longer recharge. They're 5+ seconds. So the 4-second recharge on this is part of what makes this my go-to lead attack. The fact that it also becomes unblockable when you're enchanted is just an additional boon on top of that. This is my 5. I'm giving this guy a 5 because this is the lead attack that I always bring. It's very, very, very hard to dislodge this for me, just because that utility of quick recharge, can be unblockable, decent plus damage. It's just very solid. It's a really good spot. And I think that this becomes less exciting if you're trying to go for some of the longer chain stuff, but even then, it's totally reasonable. So, I don't know. It's got just enough going for it that it kind of edges out a lot of the other lead attacks. And again, like I've mentioned before, you only want so many lead attacks, and that's kind of where it comes down. Golden Lotus Strike. So this is 5 energy, 5-second recharge. So you can see that 5-second recharge there. This is a lead attack. If it hits, this attack strikes for plus 17 damage. If you are under the effects of enchantment, you gain 7 energy. So, like, this is perfectly serviceable. I wouldn't tend to lean towards this one as much, just because gaining the energy at the start of your combo tends to be less exciting than gaining it in the middle of your combo. So I prefer something like the Falling Lotus Strike as an example. But, you know, there are situations where this can be useful. This is a 3. Like, it's perfectly adequate. It's fine. But it can't edge out Golden Fox Strike's lower recharge and technically higher plus damage. Like, the energy gain just isn't meaningful enough to kind of offset that. So that's kind of unfortunately where it's at. But, you know, I like the options of where it's kind of playing around and whatnot. Golden Phoenix Strike. So this is 5 energy, 8-second recharge. It is an offhand attack. If you are not under the effects of an enchantment, this skill misses. So this is an offhand that does not require lead attack. It requires you to be enchanted instead. And if it hits, Golden Phoenix Strike deals plus 26 damage, and all adjacent foes take 26 damage. So this is kind of the Death Blossom effect, except it's a little bit longer recharge, which is a huge downside. It does require you to be enchanted, but that's relatively easy to compensate with. I really like this one in sort of the longer chains. This is a nice way to open up a chain as well. It's a pretty powerful skill, allowing you to be able to jump straight to dual attacks and that sort of thing. But it is a little bit more awkward to use because it does require you to be enchanted. Like, that's easy enough condition to meet. Also, the 8-second recharge is a bit long for what I'm typically doing. So a lot of, again, the standard issue chain of Golden Fox Strike into Wild Strike into Death Blossom is just very efficient. So the only reason why I would tend to pick this over just doing that chain, or add this in addition to that chain, like, is if I'm doing something that's a more complicated combo where being able to short circuit and short jump right into offhand attack is valuable. I'm going to give this guy a 3 because I think the effect is quite potent, and being enchanted is a very easy condition to meet. It's not like having to knock down a foe or having to hex a foe or something like that, which tends to be a lot more finicky. It's very reasonable to be playing with the enchanted condition met, and this effect is very useful. But again, I have that standard chain that I go to for a reason, and unfortunately Golden Phoenix Strike has a hard time unseating that. So, especially for heroes. But again, I really like this skill if I'm trying to do a more complicated, longer chain, at which point you're going through enough attacks that the recharge on this is not a huge downside either. Okay, Golden Skull Strike. So this is 10 energy, 15-second recharge. Elite offhand attack. If you are under the effects of an enchantment and this attack hits, target foe is dazed for 4 seconds. So I believe this this is just an offhand attack that doesn't have any requirements. So I believe it can just hit even if they are not under the effects of, or even if you are not under the effects of an enchantment. It requires the enchantment for the dazed, which is, if you're not getting the dazed off, then you're spending your elite slot on a 10 energy, 15-second elite offhand attack with no benefit, other than you are skipping a lead attack, which is not no benefit. But it is important to note that, like, this is an offhand attack that does not have any requirements. That does count for something, but it also has a very lengthy 15-second recharge and a high 10 energy cost. You are getting something useful out of that 10 energy if you are enchanted. Otherwise, I'd rather just use a much quicker recharging lead attack to offhand attack chain, because skipping those with like the 15-second recharge and whatnot, like it's probably going to be about the same energy, and the 15-second recharge is just a huge downside. So you do need to be getting the days off on this. Again, that's not hard to do. It's relatively easy to make sure you're enchanted. So this also takes up your elite slot, however, which is a pretty big downside. It's kind of competing with Temple Strike, which is similar but not quite the same, because Temple Strike does require elite attack to follow up on. It also inflicts blind. It's not quite the same. But Golden Skull Strike, to me, like, this is another one of those threes. I'm not going to typically be bringing it. It can be a pretty reasonable opener. Like, I could see doing this followed with like critical strikes to get your energy back before launching into kind of the next phase of your combo. Dazing the foe is a really good way of disabling them to be able to get a bunch of stuff off, especially if they're a healer. So there's a lot of kind of usefulness I could see from that standpoint. But yeah, like, this is not typically what I'm going to be bringing for my elite, and that's honestly, if this was not an elite, it would consider it a little bit more, but even then, not that often. But the elite slot is kind of pricey for this. So, Horns of the Ox. So Horns of the Ox is 5 energy with a 12-second recharge. It is a dual attack, must follow an offhand attack. If it hits, Horns of the Ox strikes for +9 damage. If you struck a foe that is not adjacent to any allies, and to any of their allies, to be clear, that foe is knocked down. So, the Ox dual attacks, Horns of the Ox and Trampling Ox, both have conditional knockdown. This can be a role player in some of those builds where you follow with one of the falling attacks that kind of come after. So Trampling Ox is condition. Okay, so Trampling Ox, first of all, it deals more damage, has a shorter recharge, and its condition is crippled, which you can build around a little bit better. This Horns of the Ox came first, to be clear. I think, like, so this plays into sort of the assassin ambushing somebody, and then, like, you know, Golden Phoenix Strike, and Horns of the Ox to knock down this person who's kind of off to the side, and then, like, falling Lotus Strike to get your energy back, or Spider Strike, and to, like, Twisting Fangs or something to like have this 4 attack chain that really hammers in a lot of damage conditions and stuff. Like, that's a cool space to be playing around in. I like the sort of role that this plays in that. I think Trampling Ox is a better facilitator of that, if that makes sense. But I feel like this is one of those skills that's like, this is fine. It's not impossible to get its condition off by any means. So, like, to me, this is like another 3. It's like, this is perfectly serviceable skill. It has a lot of useful, like, combo potentials. It's just fine on its own. I mean, obviously it needs to be following offhand attack, but you know what I mean. It's kind of fine. But it's not, like, exciting all the time. Like, it's got a longer recharge, and so unless I'm really able to take advantage of the knockdown, I'm not going to, like, grab it over, again, Death Blossom. That's really the main issue, is Death Blossom is doing the area of effect damage that I typically want. So this is great on a single target. That's kind of by itself, but I think Trampling Ox is a little bit preferable, and I'd rather try to build around that one than this one. Jagged Strike. So Jagged Strike is 5 energy, half-second activation time, 1 second recharge. It is a lead attack, and if Jagged Strike hits, your target suffers from bleeding for 17 seconds. So this one's okay. Bleed is obviously, I've mentioned a bajillion times, not the most exciting condition. It adds up a little bit of damage. It can be a nice little role player in adding some pressure. Plays really poorly with sharpened daggers, which just makes all of your dagger attacks bleed anyway. The main thing that this has going for it is it's a quick activating lead attack with basically no recharge, which can be really useful if you are, say, wanting to bring 1 lead attack and then 2 offhands, 2 dual attacks, where you go, like, Jagged Strike you, offhand 1, dual attack 1, Jagged Strike you, offhand 2, dual attack 2. There's some legitimate space for that. I do not like this on heroes because heroes will spam their energy out on this guy, which is not what you want them to do. So I'm not fond of trying to run this with heroes because of that. This is not worth 5 energy to inflict bleed on an enemy for 17 seconds. This is worth 5 energy for I'm getting a lead attack mark quickly, and the bleed is kind of a bonus. So, honestly, to me, this is like... I think I'm going to give this a 3, because I feel like it can kind of... It's versatile enough it has a versatile enough role in Assassin Bar to play, and it does get you very quickly to the parts of your combo that tend to be more interesting. But again, like, I like Golden Fox Strike because I don't need the faster recharge of Jagged Strike, and I like the greater effect that Golden Fox Strike has. So I think this is like perfectly adequate, but you know, a little like just adequate and not kind of above that. But I like the space that it kind of has because it does open up some additional possibilities for kind of arranging things. Okay, Jungle Strike. So Jungle Strike is 5 energy, half-second activation, 10-second recharge. It is an offhand attack, must follow lead attack. If it hits, this attack strikes for plus 22 damage. Okay, that's okay, but not most exciting. If it hits a foe that was crippled, that foe and all adjacent foes take plus 25 damage. So this has an area of effect conditional on it. The 10-second recharge is really what kills this. It does require you to be inflicting crippled as well, which is a little awkward. It does kind of make me wish that we got Jungle Ox instead of Trampling Ox, just that way you could have Jungle be, it triggers on crippled foes. Yeah, I wouldn't use this if I'm not inflicting crippled. So oftentimes I'm not. I'm usually using like water magic if I'm going to be snaring enemies at all. So to me, this is a 2. Because I think you do have, like, I think it's okay if you are building around it, but I do think you have to build around it. You do have to be inflicting the cripples to really make it worthwhile. And unfortunately, the 10-second recharge is just a bit on the long side for an offhand. So I would like this skill better at more of a 5 or 6 second recharge. 10 is just a bit on the long side. So I like the notion of what it's trying to do, though, and I like that it's kind of playing around in a different space. Leaping Mantis Sting. So this is 5 energy, half-second activation, 8-second recharge. It is a lead attack, and if Mantis... It just says Mantis Sting here instead of Leaping Mantis Sting. That's interesting. If Mantis Sting hits target foe, it takes plus 13 damage. If this attack strikes a moving foe, that foe is crippled for 13 seconds. So you really need to be hitting a moving foe. That's not always the most reliable condition to get. You really have to be chasing the enemy with that. This would be much more interesting if it was like 10 energy and say... probably a 30-second recharge is what it'd have to be. If it was a lead attack that said, Shadow Step to target foe and strike them for plus 13 damage and cripple them for 13 seconds. Something like that would be much more exciting and interesting to me. Obviously, that would be quite powerful, but that sort of space would be an area that I think would be interesting to play around in. ArenaNet never did any of that sort of thing. I don't know if the tech even could support it, but... as far as I'm concerned, like, this is another one of those, like, this is okay. It has the quick activation, which is nice. The recharge is kind of long, and it really does need to hit a moving foe to get the crippled to kind of be worthwhile, but I don't know. To me, this is like another one of those, like, this is probably a 3. I don't strongly dislike it. I think the effect is quite useful. I'm going to give it a 3. Just because I feel like it's a fine skill-ish, but like a little bit long on the recharge. Damage is a little bit low. Condition is a little bit more awkward than you want it to be. So it's just like, this is okay. Lotus Strike. 10 energy, 12-second recharge. Offhand attack must follow lead attack, and if it hits, this attack strikes for plus 22 damage, and you gain 17 energy. So this nets you 7 energy, obviously. You do have to have the 10 energy to put into it in the first place, of course. That's always a requirement on these. Damage is kind of middle. Not exciting for an offhand attack. I usually want those to be more in the 30 area rather than the 20 area. But the energy gain can be nice. Obviously, it helps offset some of the costs of a more expensive chain, and it is a very reliable way of doing that because it doesn't have any sort of condition for gaining energy. It's not like Black Lotus Strike that requires them to be hexed, although that's the lead attack. It's not like Falling Lotus Strike that requires them to be knocked down. So it's pretty straightforward to use. I don't know. To me, this is like another one of those 3s. Like I feel like so many of the dagger attacks are just going to be 3s because like this is fine. I'm not like, I don't think this is a bad skill, but it can't quite, because again, like one of the issues that Assassin has here is that the lead attack, offhand attack, dual attack system means that you have a narrower band of slots that skills are competing in. That then makes things really, really tight. So I think Lotus Strike could be a skill that I could just see, oh, this is a bar that tends to be a little expensive. Let's just slap this on here to help clear up energy management and stuff like that. I feel like it's fine for that, but it's just not quite exciting. But it could be a role player, and like that's kind of where I see 3s as being. So Mobius Strike. So Mobius Strike is 5 energy, 2-second recharge. Again, very low recharge. Plays really well with Death Blossom, as we'll see. It is an elite offhand attack that must follow a dual attack. This is one of... There's like 3, maybe 4 skills that require following a dual attack. And this one is unique in that it is a offhand, so it can loop you back. That's why it's called Mobius, right? So a Mobius strip is like a piece of paper with a half twist in it, so that way you can... if you follow all the way around one side, you'll end up on the other side. It's a weird... one-sided object. It's very strange. But Mobius Strike here, so if it hits, Mobius Strike strikes for plus 30 damage, and if you strike a foe whose health is below 50%, all of your other attack skills are recharged. Interesting that this recharges all of your other attack skills, not just all of your other like dagger attack skills. So I guess technically this would like recharge, I don't know, bow attacks and stuff like that. It's not going to come up because you're not going to use another weapons attack skills. But if you have, say, Malicious Strike, which was just a melee attack, or if you're using like Thrill of Victory, or technically if you're using like power attack or things like that, although that doesn't really matter. But like Thrill of Victory, I guess, would get recharged by this, which might be nice. But anyway, this recharges your other attack skills. So this is really strong with Death Blossom because they both have a 2-second recharge, so you can just use Death Blossom, Mobius Strike. Now that's an offhand that Death Blossom can follow, so you just chain Mobius Strike, Death Blossom. That can be really powerful. I don't always bring Mobius Strike, but I'm going to give this a 4. I think this is an extraordinarily powerful effect. This is an incredible way of being able to extend your combo chains. It can pump out a lot of damage. Once you're below that 50% health threshold on the target, you basically are just going Mobius Strike, dual attack, Mobius Strike, dual attack, Mobius Strike, dual attack, and you're just spamming those, alternating each other, and it can pump out a lot of damage. Not most foes will survive that for very long, quite bluntly, because like you're talking maybe 600 HP if they're getting down below 300. How many times can they take plus 30 and then 2 plus 40s, plus 30, 2 plus 40s? Like not very long. But anyway, this is an incredibly powerful skill. It's a very unique skill. It does a very useful effect, and you can certainly like throw in critical strikes in there. Critical strike to be able to get more energy back and stuff too. And so, very interesting space to play around in. I'm glad that they have a skill that's doing this sort of thing. That's saying, oh, we are an offhand attack that follows a dual attack. I think that's really cool, and I really like that. So Mobius Strike, really cool space. I really like what it's doing. It is very powerful, but it's that power is counteracted by the fact that it's an elite, and sometimes there's other elite effects that I want. Especially elite shadow steps are something that can displace Mobius Strike, like Aura of Displacement, for example. So I like that sort of aspect to it. It's a really good elite design. It's kind of what I'm saying, in that it does something that's really powerful and really useful, but not so much so that it pushes out other elite options. Okay, that brings us to Ninetail Strike. So Ninetail Strike is 5 energy, 8-second recharge, dual attack, must follow an offhand attack. If Ninetail Strike cannot be blocked and strikes for plus 35 damage if it hits. Obviously, something like Blind can make it miss, things like that. This thing's biggest problem is, honestly, Death Blossom is more damage, and like 8-second recharge is a little bit longer. Like, this is another like solid 3 for me. This is perfectly fine. The damage is there. Being unblockable is certainly nice. Although, honestly, if I'm really wanting unblockability, it's probably because I want like Shattering Assault's unblockability to get rid of enchantments or things like that. So, truthfully, unblockable is a nice benefit, but if it's a stance, I probably am going to be able to just Golden Fox Strike into Wild Strike to get rid of it. So Ninetail Strike's unblockability just isn't relevant. Or there's enchantments going on that I'm going to want to specifically bring, like Shattering Assault. Was it Shattering Assault? No, yeah, Shattering Assaults to get rid of the enchantments or things like that. So basically, Ninetail Strike's biggest problem is it has no effective way of unseating Death Blossom, and that's the problem with most dual attacks. The thing is, there's no additional useful properties that can allow this to kind of fit into a more powerful, a longer chain, like Horns of the Ox and Trampling Ox can both allow you to extend a combo by comboing into other skills, and Ninetail Strike doesn't do that. It's just like, yeah, I'm good unblockable damage, and that's just usually just not quite enough, especially when you have, I'm good, I'm even better damage that also does area of effect and has a much shorter recharge. Like, it just doesn't quite compete with that, unfortunately. So, Repeating Strike. So this is a very unique skill. It is 5 energy. And that's it. No activation time because it's just an attack, so standard attack. No recharge. It is an offhand attack that must follow an offhand attack. And if it hits, it strikes for plus 26 damage. If it misses, it takes an additional 15 seconds to recharge. So this is a weird gimmicky skill. You can use it to extend any combo indefinitely, because you just go, lead attack, offhand attack, repeating strike as much as you want, and then into a dual attack or whatever. So this is like, it's slottable into just basically an assassin bar. It specifically works really well with, where is it? Is it Way of the Empty Palm? I think that might be Deadly Arts, because Deadly Arts has randomly a lot of skills in it. Way of the Empty Palm right here, which makes offhand attacks and dual attacks cost no energy, which means you can use Repeating Strike without any energy cost, which is cute, I guess. I don't know. Like, this is another 3. It's a perfectly fine skill. It's a really cool. I like the design. I like the design of like, hey, we can make a skill that uses the exact, like, is the type of skill that it requires, so it can loop into itself like this. And like, I think that's a really cool design. This would definitely be better if it had a half-second activation or even a second activation, something like that, to kind of speed it up. That would make it more exciting, although probably too strong, because you'd probably get too much DPS off of that. But I like the space that this is playing in, because it's like, hey, this is a thing that we could do, and that becomes really interesting. So yeah, it's fine. It's a cool design, and you can just toss it on basically any standard dagger assassin bar and make use of it. But the thing is, I generally would prefer to just kind of loop Death Blossoms or get back to Death Blossom as quickly as I can. So that's its kind of big issue. Okay, that brings us to Temple Strike. Notably, the temple is the side of your head. There can be kind of like a bit of a raised area there, but it's basically, this is talking about hitting the side of the head, kind of back behind the eyes. That's where the temple is. So Temple Strike is talking about hitting that part. So it's 15 energy, 20-second recharge. It is an elite offhand attack that must follow a lead attack. And if this attack hits, then your target is dazed and blinded for 8 seconds. And if they were casting a spell, that foe is interrupted. So this is a really powerful bit of disabling. Blind will disable physical attackers. Dazed, because you're a physical attacker attacking them, will disable most spellcasters effectively. So this is a really good way of saying, you specifically are out of this fight. I'm not sure. I don't typically use this one because, as you may have picked up, it's a lot of energy with a long recharge. 8-second blind and dazed are both decently lasting durations for those, but honestly, if I'm really wanting blind, I'm probably bringing Blinding Surge Elementalist, because that's an area of effect blind that I can kind of keep up. If I just want some mischance, I'll bring like Blurred Vision or like Reckless Haste or things like that. I kind of do that in an area of effect. Or like Ineptitude is another really good option for inflicting a longer lasting blind in an area of effect. So again, like in the context of just the assassin, this is a really good disabling spell, disabling attack. That's a great way of saying this enemy in particular is not doing anything for a little bit. In the context of a broader team build, I can get these effects better in other professions. So I can get longer lasting blind or more effective like blind application in Elementalist or in Mesmer with Blinding Surge and Ineptitude respectively. And I can get longer lasting dazed and like better dazed uptime and stuff in Ranger and Paragon. So while this is specifically good at this thing, in the context of the assassin, in the context of a team, it's not. So it kind of leaves it in a wonky spot in that regard. I actually kind of like Golden Skull Strike better because this is just like typically inflicting daze is going to be more relevant. And I could go like Golden Skull Strike into Horns of the Ox to knock them down. And then like Falling Lotus Strike Death Blossom or something, where that to me feels like a better way of doing it. Golden Skull Strike has a shorter recharge, less energy cost. I kind of like that a little bit better. It allows me to be able to jump straight into offhand attacks. That said, like Temple Strike is technically a relatively powerful effect. It's just not one that I bring very often, so I'm going to give this like a 3. It does kind of just work. I think, yeah, Golden Skull Strike was also like a lot of these are 3s because like again, a lot of them are like they're fine. I'm happy to run them. It's just they are competing for very specific slots, and Temple Strike has the downside of competing for your elite slot. I would not bring this as my offhand attack. The recharge is just way too long for that. This is like, oh yeah, sometimes I go into Temple Strike. So that's an important consideration. But I like the idea of where this skill is. It's just, in the broader context of a team, it just doesn't quite have a place. But in the context of something like Fort Aspenwood PvP, being able to, like, corner a person and Temple Strike them, like, maybe you throw a hex, some sort of useful hex on them, and then you Mantis Sting them, and then Temple Strike them, and then Trampling Ox them, and then Falling Lotus Strike them into Twisting Fangs or something, and it's like, oh man, I've disabled this person, they cannot escape, they're pummeled with damage. Like that sort of thing could be cool in those sorts of like PvP scenarios that are, again, Fort Aspenwood and Jade Quarry are very individualized PvP areas. I don't even know if they're active these days. But like in PvE, you're going to be working in the context of a greater team, and in that case, if I'm wanting to get blind or dazed around, I have other tools for doing that I find preferential. So, unfortunately, that's just kind of where Temple Strike lands. So, it's a useful tool for the lone assassin and a much less useful tool for the party assassin, and that's just kind of that. Trampling Ox. So this is 5 energy, 8-second recharge, dual attack, must follow an offhand attack, and if it hits, you deal plus 17 damage. If you hit a crippled foe, that foe is knocked down. Again, this is another one of those skills that's like super useful for those like more elaborate builds, but a lot of the time, so like if I'm playing Assassin myself, a lot of the, like I will sometimes make those more elaborate builds, but just a lot of the time I am going very straightforward, Golden Fox Strike, Wild Strike, Death Blossom. That tends to be what I do. So to me, like this guy is just, it's another 3 of like, yeah, I'm fine with this, but a lot of these dagger attacks just kind of fall into the sea of like, yeah, they exist, but they're not the 4 that I use of Golden Fox Strike, Wild Strike, Death Blossom, and Critical Strike. For a reminder, I've brought it up a couple times. It shares a name almost with the attribute. Critical Strike is a dual attack that always critical hits and gains you energy, so it's some energy management. So, like, here's the thing. A typical Assassin bar for me is going to be something along the lines of, like, these... And then Wastrel's Collapse, probably, and just some other random filler skill that does something useful. Dash, maybe. Dash is an increased move speed skill. Or, frankly, often is going to be something like Sharpened Daggers or Assassin's Remedy. So something like this is a really typical sort of assassin bar that I would just run on a hero or something like that. And this is fine. This is perfectly fine. It gives me some additional defense, some additional energy management, some condition removal, a nice shadow step. And it just doesn't need these skills like Trampling Ox that are a really good player in those more elaborate chains, which... Honestly, if I'm playing an assassin myself, those chains can be a lot of fun, and so I might try to build those sorts of things. But if I'm just playing with heroes, they're probably not going to use those chains very competently, and so something like this is perfectly serviceable. And like this is what I'm happy to run a lot of the time. And so Trampling Ox is really cool for those more elaborate chains, but is not just a skill that I'm going to toss on a bar. Like, this is not exciting unless I have crippled that I'm being inflicting, and so there's a little bit more complication there, but it's such a strong role player in some of those more elaborate chains. I do think it deserves more than a 2. So and that brings us to Wild Strike. So Wild Strike is 5 energy, 4-second recharge, offhand attack, must follow a lead attack. If it hits, this attack strikes for plus 30 damage, and any stance being used by a target foe ends. This attack cannot be blocked. It can miss from like blind and stuff like that, so that's why it might not hit. And like I've been alluding, this is a 5. Because this is basically always stapled to my Assassin bar. Like, this is such an important role player in chain. This skill, in fact, will single-handedly be the reason why I bring an Assassin on my team. Because this is, in my personal opinion, one of the best stance removal skills in the game. You can argue, I think, for using like a Scythe with like Wild Blow or things like that, where you can AoE remove stances, but every 4 seconds you're able to remove a stance. You're able to get through those blocking stances that you want to get through, because like this sort of build right here, Assassin's Remedy, critical defenses, these mean you're enchanted, so this is unblockable, and that leads straight into a Wild Strike. And like this combo of unblockable lead attack into unblockable stance ending offhand into really good damage is just really good utility. I particularly like, you basically always want to make sure you have an assassin when you're fighting Shiro Dagachi, because he has some really nasty stance. I think he has a really nasty stance that he uses that's really useful to end, and so you can continually end it with Wild Strike. This is just really, really good stance removal, and like I said, if I am going into an area where I know stances are going to be particularly prevalent, I'm really happy to bring Wild Strike with me. Realistically, I think this would have been a bit better if it had made the stance removal conditional. Like, maybe this attack hits for plus 30 damage, can't be blocked, and If it's a critical hit and it ends the stance or something like that, that would kind of put it in a better spot. Or I don't know. I genuinely feel like this skill is maybe just a little too like good. The recharge is a little too quick. The energy cost is fine. I wouldn't really. This doesn't need to be 10 energy skill, but I feel like the recharge is maybe just a little bit good. The unblockable plus stance removal really do belong together. So maybe the plus damage should come down. Something. I feel like the skill is just a little bit too much everything that you want. It's got a really pretty low recharge at 4 seconds. It fits right nicely into your build with being an offhand to lead into Death Blossom. It does really solid plus damage. It can't be blocked. It removes a stance. Like, it just does a bit too much for its costs. So I think that this skill probably needs to be like more of a 6-second recharge, 7-second recharge, maybe even 8-second recharge. 6 is probably a better spot, and like put this at 6-second recharge and like plus 10 damage, and I would still bring it to remove stances, but I'd be less excited by it. Stuff like that. I don't know. It's one of those things where it's really tricky to kind of figure out how to place stuff exactly, but I feel like this skill is probably just a little too strong. So anyway, that concludes Dagger Mastery. So I am going to go ahead and wrap this episode up here. And next time we will talk about Deadly Arts. So until then, everyone, take care and goodbye.